Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
You are listening to Mortification of Spin. My name is Todd Pruitt. I'm the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I'm joined, as always, by my friend Carl Trueman, who is a professor at Grove City College, this year on loan to Notre Dame. He just swam across the Tiber just for a school year, and he promises he will swim back. Carl, good to see you.
Good to be here, Todd. I have a colleague at Notre Dame. I won't mention his name,
Yes.
Catholic colleague, and I was talking to him about being a Protestant at Notre Dame, and he said, if you're an Orthodox Protestant at Notre Dame, you're still in the top 10% of Orthodox Catholics who are here. So it's definitely a more Catholic institution than Georgetown, where my youngest son went, but it's like some Protestant institutions we could think of. It's a mixed campus, very mixed campus, but they've been very good to me, and I've had a delightful year here.
Mm-hmm. Good. And from what I understand, we're recording this in February. At the end of February, you're headed out once again to Rome to meet with members of the Illuminati. Who is it? Like
the
some
Knights
kind of
Templar. They'll all
of...
be there. Yes. No, I'm doing my wife and I are doing our annual vacation to Rome. I always say to the female students at Grove, if you're dating a guy and you ask him, if we get married, will you take me to Rome? And he hesitates or says no, kick him to the curb. You deserve a whole lot better than that. I would say. Sorry?
I was just going to say, and speaking of objective standards of manliness, like agree to take your wife to Rome once you're married.
Most romantic thing in the world, yeah.
Exactly. Speaking of that, we have a guest, Carl, somebody you have known for a while, somebody I have known for a while. He's a fellow PCA pastor. His name is Brian Cosby. In fact, I'm going to do this right. He's the Reverend Dr. Brian Cosby. He is the pastor of Wayside Presbyterian Church in the Chattanooga area. It's a beautiful place, beautiful city, beautiful area where his church is. And if you live in the Chattanooga area, you might want to check out Wayside Presbyterian Church. Brian also is a theologian. He's a published author. He teaches at Reformed Theological Seminary, teaches systematic theology and whatnot. So he doesn't do a whole lot. And the other thing is that Brian has a YouTube channel that gets like half the world's population is now tuning in to see him do everything from sight in a rifle scope to sand and stain a board and all that good stuff. Actually, seriously, Brian, you started. I'm just going to bring you into this, Brian. You started this YouTube channel. How long? You haven't been doing it all that long.
Yeah, it was 2022, May of 2022, and it took like a year and a half to get to 1,000 followers, supporters, and then I talked to a friend, and he was like, "Yeah, you got to do better at a few things." And I started doing that. He was taking his advice, and all of a sudden, it went to over 250,000, and it's
which is amazing.
Crazy journey. Yeah.
So tell people where they can find you on YouTube.
Yeah, if you just put in "Provide and Protect."
Provide and Protect. That'll take you to and it's really interesting. I mean, even I, who don't know how to do anything, I really like the videos. I sit there and I think, if I knew how to do something, or if I was willing to do something, I think I'd like to do that.
Yeah, I do it with my boys, so it's a kind of fun thing to do with them. They do all the videography and filming, and it's kind of my time to just kind of be with my boys, especially. I've got a daughter too, so I do different things with her, but they help me out.
Well, and I would tell our listeners, in all seriousness, if you go on there, it's a wide variety of products and subjects that Brian covers. Everything, as I said, from how to handle a firearm well, what's something good to have at home for home defense, woodworking, all this kind of stuff, as well as then you'll bring up certain and address certain theological questions like, is it biblical to have an armed response in your home, to protect your family, and so it's a really fun YouTube channel. It's informative. It's very well done. You do a great job of producing it. But we're here to really talk about your newest upcoming book called Provide and Protect. And it's all about what we learn in Scripture about masculinity, biblical manhood. It's a subject we've heard before. It's a subject that some people have handled really badly. And it's a subject that needs to be addressed for a whole variety of reasons. We're introduced to the whole subject of what it means to be a man in the opening paragraphs of Scripture, basically. So it's a pretty important topic. Some guys have handled it poorly, and we could bring up those examples. But Brian, in this book, you're really endeavoring to give a faithful biblical answer to the question of, what does it mean to be a man? What's our responsibilities? And you've distilled it down to this kind of manageable set of categories called provide and protect. Yeah. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So for the YouTube channel, I'd say 98% of my audience, they're men. And they're obviously going to be naturally drawn to certain things that I do on the channel. But what I started hearing was a lot of comments. I get hundreds of comments and emails and stuff a day, and those comments from mostly men, and a lot of men are struggling in a big way. And so I had a sabbatical last summer, so 2025, summer 2020. You did too, I think, right? So my task, my project for that sabbatical was this book, and part of it came also from, I'm seeing more and more young men. Of course, we saw this really heightened after the Charlie Kirk thing, although, there's different data on that now. But after the Charlie Kirk assassination, there's been this rise. It's a K graph. And Carl, I know you're familiar with this, but the K graph of, high school senior boys versus high school senior girls. The high school senior boys are becoming way more conservative, while the high school senior girls are becoming way more liberal. Yeah. And I was kind of curious, why is that? And so a lot of young men today, not just high school, but college and young adults, they are going after and really following people like Andrew Tate or Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson or, a bunch of other people like that. The problem is none of them are Christian.
Right.
They're not presenting any kind of biblical worldview on masculinity. You take Andrew Tate, for example, and the vision of masculinity that he's pushing is something like flashy cars and scantily clad women and that kind of thing. That's masculinity, is what he's kind of saying, a cigar to boot with no shirt. And we're trying to say, actually, it's more than that. And it's actually very different from that. And so we're going back to Genesis 2:15. And the idea of work and keep, and I really leaned heavily upon Rick Phillips in this discussion, Masculine Mandate, also a wonderful book by Rick Phillips. And going into those Hebrew words to work and to keep, and the idea of working there, the laboring, of course, this is before the fall. So the idea of work is not a bad thing. It's a pre-fall creation idea and mandate for us. And then the keep, that word for keep there in Genesis 2:15 is also used throughout the Old Testament for officials, like government officials and soldiers, that kind of thing, and even though of the Lord, like Psalm 121, the Lord keeping his people, there's a protecting piece to that. So the more I thought about it as men, really distilling down those fundamental callings of a man, it's not the fundamental identity. That would be in Jesus for the Christian, but certainly a fundamental calling as a duty for men to provide for and protect not only himself, but also his family, his church, his community. And, I was it reminded me, I did watch the State of the Union. I'm not going to make this political at all, but it did remind me of, Trump mentioned the girl, the Ukrainian girl that was
Yes.
killed on the train.
Yes.
And what hit me about that little video, it was, of course, devastating. I hated to watch it. But what hit me was that, you had all these people around her and around the attacker. And when he did that, and then he started to get up, leave, and she was like looking around for a moment before she passed away. Like no one else on the train did anything about it. And I keep thinking about the mantle of responsibility for men. And what happens now is like, some older gentleman or older woman gets beat up on a street in New York, and everybody just takes out their cell phone and starts videotaping it. And there's no one actually thinking about like protecting, like stepping up and doing something about it. So I'm seeing the trend of the younger men today, and I'm seeing what's just on the news all the time and these videos. I'm like, there's got to be some other way, from men. And so that's one of the reasons, one of the big kind of motivations of going into this study.
Yeah.
To what extent, Brian, do you think that what you're describing there is not merely the word crisis is overused, but I'm going to use it here. It's not merely a crisis in masculinity, but it's a crisis in humanity. That the idea of ourselves as unencumbered individuals, if we're related to each other at all by purely voluntary contractual relationships, to what extent do you think that is, the underlying problem, even behind the what roles do men and women have idea? To what extent is it that broader anthropological mess of which the male-female thing is really but a symptom at this point?
Well, it's a great question, Carl. I think. Look, can I back up just for a second before I answer the question?
Yeah.
So one of the issues that I found, so part of my research, I looked at 8 different metrics of men today, and I called it the plight of men. And I mean, we're dealing with educational issues, vocational, relational, mental issues, spiritual issues, legal issues. I mean, across the board, men are struggling in a huge way. But to more specifically answer your question is with the war on men. And I actually quote you in my book, by the way, with the expressive individualism that you talk about in a couple of different places. And I think that especially for the modern wave, the most recent feminist wave that we're seeing today, it's not only wanting to see women rise up, in places of power or, dominance or anything like that, but it's also that intersectionality. And the reason that that's a problem is that it undermines the distinctiveness between men and women. So back to the anthropology, what you're talking about anthropology here is undermining the distinctiveness between men and women. So what we want to do today in our culture, broadly speaking, is saying that men and women are all the same, like equal means sameness. And therefore, it blurs any kind of distinction between any kind of callings or duties or responsibilities between men and women. If you go back to the sinking of the Titanic, for example, the women and children first principle at that point, I think it was 75% or more, 75, 78% of all the women and children that survived. Very few men survived. Under 20% survived of the men. There was a sense of responsibility that was ingrained into their own anthropology, their sense of identity. Their expressive individualism was something that was more rooted in scripture than it is today. So I do think that's a fundamental issue that we're seeing. A number of years ago, probably 10 years ago, we were clearing some property up here near Chattanooga. And there was a pack of dogs that killed a donkey, my neighbor's donkey, and chased caretaker and killed some other animals next door. And so I went to put up a perimeter fence. I don't want my kids to be, hurt by that. And as I was doing that, I was going through the woods and I was marking out trees for clearing. And I had my machete with me. And I was coming back up to my truck up this like hill. and there's a pack of dogs, like the same dogs, and they were running like right toward me. And I started running at them with my machete. And I had every, not only intention, but every confidence, like it was going to be a bad day for the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, thankfully, they got scared and ran away. But I thought about it after, I reflected on that afterwards. Like, why did I do that? You know, like why do men rush into Twin Towers, or why, what is it ingrained in the man, as we're created in God's image, not man, male and female, the male, why are we designed, and why do we have that proclivity, that tendentiousness to run into danger like that? I saw a little video of these two brothers. They're like 8, 10 years old, and they turn onto this like dark, dimly lit hallway of like a shabby hotel, and there's a doll, like a creepy doll at the end of this corridor, and immediately one of them just ran away. The other one ran right at it and kicked it as if it was like a field goal, and I was like, okay, what's the difference between how we're raising boys today? Also, I mean, there's not only a plight of men and war on men, there's a war on boys. And I think one of the reasons that so many young men are trending toward these ultra right kind of people that are not presenting a biblical masculinity is because they're being told their whole life that they're toxic. Their whole life they're being told, because I'm a male, I'm a toxic individual, I'm the problem of society. I think a lot of guys are just tired of hearing it. Like,
it's interesting. It's interesting that a woman, Christina Hoff Sommers, called attention to this 25 years ago, at least, in her book, The Long War Against Boys, where she warned about this before a lot of people were talking about it. As a woman, she stepped up and wrote a book on the subject, and she was attacked by the left on this, but she calls it out and just saying, we're going to have a crisis on our hands because of the way boys are being treated in schools, in commercials, by the entertainment industry, all the kind of culture makers. She was calling it 25 years ago, saying this is going to yield a really bad thing, and it has. Carl, I don't know what you see among university students, like at Grove City or now at Notre Dame, but I've talked to some young men, and they're just angry. They're angry, and they'll tune into a Nick Fuentes or Andrew Tate because those guys help them stoke their anger. I also think that those guys,
I think those guys too are also the younger men that are listening to them. I think they're feeling like at least we have some public individuals that are speaking out for me.
Yeah.
Like they're like, I'm feeling this way, and finally people are standing up for me. And I think that's one of the problems.
And they don't stop to really evaluate how damaging the message is. Yeah. But what it does is it helps them indulge their anger, which of course is a really unhealthy thing to do. And I've addressed this from the pulpit, just to tell our young men, we have a growing number of students that are coming to our church, and to just say, brothers, I understand some of you are angry. I can understand why you would be. You've been told horrible things about yourself all of your life just because you're male. Guys, Christ has a much better way for you than Andrew Tate does. And it needs to be addressed. I don't know, Carl. I mean, Grove City's kind of a special place.
It is. Our students are somewhat self-selecting, though. One could say that the more conservative nature of Grove City perhaps would make it more vulnerable to this stuff. Yeah. I guess I don't want to sound skeptical here, but my instincts are it's very early for us to start drawing big conclusions about why people like Andrew Tate and company are so influential. I also wonder if a big part of the story is just the breakdown of the family, that it's not so, it may well be society telling young men they're toxic. It could easily as well be part of growing up in a family where dad is not a good role model. For example,
and those things probably go together really well, I would think.
Yes. I'm not putting these forward as exclusive, mutually exclusive. The other side of me is, and this is where perhaps my more skeptical side comes out, is young men have always done the hooligan thing throughout history. uh, and why was the Reformation successful? I would say to students, because it told young men it was okay to go down the road and smash up the church. Nobody loses in history by telling young men go out and break things. So I suppose to fold that back into the narrative here would be to say, sinful men have a natural proclivity to destruction. And maybe the Andrew Tates of this world are the current temptation on that front. So none of that is to say that anything that's been said in this podcast is wrong, or to offer an alternative explanation. But it is, I think, the reason why we're seeing the problems we're seeing, it's complicated, and it has to be. 30 years ago, there was all this stuff about video games are turning young men into violent psychopaths. Again, I would say actually, the breakdown of the family may have played a role in that. Sure. So I think we need to cast the net wider when we think about this. All of that is to say, though, the lack of good male role models in our society is profound, and it goes to the highest level. There's a sense in which our heads of state should be men that we can point to and tell our kids, when you grow up, you want to be like that. Mm-hmm. Well, our current head of state and our previous head of state are foul-mouthed louts, to be honest. I don't think I'd want to point my kids to them and say, you want to be like that. That's not to say that everything the current president's done is bad at all.
Sure,
but it's to say
it's not a role model.
He would not be a role model for my son in the way that he speaks about women, or the way that he speaks to the public. So the sickness in society is pretty wide and comprehensive at this point.
Yeah, I fully agree. In my book, I have a whole section on the devastating effects of fatherlessness in our culture, the breakup of the family. And part of that, I look at, I can't remember who said this. You mentioned the Reformation just a little bit ago, Carl, but the different tributaries or streams that flow into the raging river of the Reformation, and there's all kinds of things that led to that. I think we could probably say the same thing with where we're seeing the trend today. Just sociologically, it is a trend. There is something unique about our cultural moment. The zeitgeist that we're seeing right now is unique. Where all of a sudden, you were having a certain trend that was tending liberal among younger men.
Right.
And that's changing, like in a big way. So there is something unique about right now. I think you're completely spot on, Carl, about the breakdown of the family. And you look at this percentages and the numbers of those without a dad in the home. Today, 279% more likely to deal in drugs. 90% of the homeless come from fatherless homes. 85% of those in prison right now, 85% come from fatherless homes. It's a huge issue that we have. So certainly that is a big piece of this.
Yeah.
And I certainly think, growing up, whatever happened at school, I always knew that I could go home and my mum and dad loved me. And that played a huge role in, for good or ill, making me the kind of person that I am today. I don't struggle with depression. I don't struggle with all kinds of pathologies that we're told are an epidemic in our modern society. And
I'm glad you're not.
I think a lot of. Sorry?
Yeah. I'm glad you're not in jail, too.
That's why I'm not in jail, yes. I lived just outside Philadelphia for many years, and every night, of course, the news was just one shooting after another. And I would bet that 95% plus of those crimes were committed by young men, sometimes young women, but certainly young men from homes that were simply not what they should be. And again, that goes, I think, to the heart of your burden in your book, Brian, where you're arguing that men have to step up and play a particular role. It falls on the man's shoulders to be a certain kind of man in order to create a certain kind of safe environment for his wife and his children.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I'm dealing with now, I got this question 2 weeks ago, the role of AI relationships And
Yes.
I had a guy ask me, hey, is it sinful? I've just kind of abandoned the idea of trying to find a relationship. And so I think it's like 60 something percent of men under 30 are not married.
Right.
And you go back to like the 1970s, it was like 85% were married by that point. So like very few people are getting married. Fewer people are looking even for a relationship because they don't want to be rejected and have that rejection posted everywhere online and most social media and everything else. And so what we're seeing now is people turning to AI relationships. And this is the question I got a couple weeks ago as a pastor, about, man, I've developed this, confessing a sin, essentially. I've developed this relationship with an AI girlfriend or whatever online.
Wow.
And she never judges me. She never talks down to me or whatever. And I feel, after work, I come home and I just talk to her and we're happy.
Yeah. If only Todd and I had that option 36 years ago.
All my friends need to be AI. But isn't that? I mean, Carl, we recently had a program on AI where we had a guy who's involved in trying to get some boundaries and that kind of thing. But
Devin Patel, yeah.
Yes, but that's again, we've got technology is enough, and my youngest son who's 25 has a lot to say about this, about the challenges that new technology have given to young men at this point, things I never had to think about. Yeah. And now his generation is navigating every day, and giving a whole category of new sins to commit that just weren't available to me in those forms. And I'm glad they weren't. But again, one more challenge that is doing things like delaying marriage, causing young men to be really cynical about women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's an alarming trend.
And I don't want all the men running after, Doug Wilson. So, I mean, you think about, okay, what are the alternatives to the Andrew Tates and Joe Rogans and these kind of people out there in the Christian sphere, world? And okay, well, I mean, because there's a lot of young guys. I mean, they were following Charlie Kirk. They're following, and they're looking for some kind of. And I'm like, look to Jesus. I mean, you look at the greatest example of all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, the one who is the ultimate provider, protector, the one who is both the lion who's strong, but also a lamb who's tender.
Mm-hmm.
He's tough and tender. He's really the ultimate one that we should be looking at, and not really chasing after these cultural icons today.
Well, that's
exactly. And
place.
Well, I thought you mentioned Doug Wilson, and I will also say, one of the things we all remember back in his heyday, although he's creating a new heyday. Mark Driscoll was known for being a guy who was raising up young men, and for a while it looked really promising. Mm-hmm. Until you got into the content, and he was just like constantly berating these guys. And for a while the guys responded kind of like a catharsis. Yes, give me another, sir. I need to be whipped in shape. And it's one thing to call men to their responsibility. It's another thing to cuss them out in a church meeting.
Yeah. I would actually call that a gimmick.
Yes.
It's almost a gimmick where if you are using that kind of language and that kind of stuff in a church setting, especially a sermon or something, that's just inappropriate. I just call it a gimmick.
And something that we return to time and again, Carl, here is, and Brian, you're a pastor, so you would, young men, get in a good church. Yeah. Get in a good church with a faithful pastor where they preach the Bible, where they practice church discipline, where they're thankful that you're a male. Get in a good church.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that our heads of state no longer provide us with good role models, but you can find a church where the minister, the elders, and the minister's wife and the elders' wives provide wonderful examples to young people. So would encourage anybody out there who hasn't found a church, find a good church, commit to it, and settle there. Yeah. All that remains is for me to thank our guest, the Reverend Dr. Brian Cosby, and commend his book to you, Provide and Protect, a guide for men in a world of weakness, wokeness, and compromise. Shame you couldn't get a third W in the end there, Brian, to keep it as sort of Anglican.
Would never work for a Baptist.
Try AI again. Yeah.
It's coming out courtesy of Mindster Media. Would also recommend that you look at, if like Todd, you don't have a real life to live yourself, we recommend YouTube channels. You can see other people
live vicariously,
they're living their lives. Brian's channel, where you can learn all those skills that I find invaluable, like how to fix a rifle sight and
kill a dog,
probably kill things, blow things up, all these vital skills that as a professor of theological studies and the only unarmed man in Western Pennsylvania, I find are of daily importance to me. No, but seriously, thank you so much, Brian, for being a guest today. Thank you for this book. Thank you, the listeners. Please go to our website, mortificationofspin.org, and you may enter there for a chance to win a copy of Brian's book. If you don't win it, please go to Amazon or wherever you purchase your books and get yourself a copy. We would like to thank you for being with us today. While you're visiting our website, if you feel led, please make a donation. We are a listener-supported podcast. And in the meantime, we look forward to being with you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.